Welcome to Tokumbo. My name is Jola Naibi, and in this limited podcast series, I'll be having conversations with Nigerian storytellers living in the diaspora. We will talk about the stories they tell, the way the stories are told, the way the stories are received, and so much more. Welcome to Tokumbo.
One of the unintended consequences of globalization is that thinkers, writers, professional folks like us can afford to take our families away from the scene of the crime. And while we stay there and pretend to be running the place.
In many African cultures, we have so much reverence for our elders, and as social media has become a global village town square, we Nigerians, and maybe other Africans have discovered him too, have an elder we call Pa Ikhide, and he's my guest on this week's episode of Tokumbo. Let's listen in. So, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. When I think of you, it's always through the lens of your social media posts and the commentary, which always has this unusual brand of humor. I think of the photos that you show of your beloved Ewu.
Yes.
and how you sometimes end your post with things like, "Have you eaten?" And there is a serious and profound side to deep wisdom where you openly express your disappointment at certain things that happen in Nigeria, but you also highlight and praise the good. And we'll go into more detail during our conversation. I think it has come to the point for me personally, when something major is happening in Nigeria, I often say to myself, I wonder what Pa Ikhide has to say about this.
Yeah.
And then I go over to your Facebook page, and while I do not always agree with what you have to say, I am deeply appreciative that that perspective even exists. So I'd like to kick off our conversation by asking, at what point did you decide that you were going to use social media as the platform for expressing your strong views on your country as a Nigerian living in the diaspora? What made you decide that you'd like to shine the spotlight on the Nigerian experience, even though you do not live in the country?
That's a great question. I never really thought of that question. So it's social media sort of grew up on me and aligned with my politics, not just politics as in politics, but the politics of narrative. So in the 90s, in the early 90s, I stumbled upon something called NigerNet.
Okay.
Yes, and NigerNet was literally the first digital watering hole in the diaspora. And there were professionals, there were mostly intellectuals, PhDs, and there were hangers-on like myself. And it was a mailing list. And in those days, you could only have an email account if you were affiliated with a powerful organization or a university. So it was unusual to have more than one email address. So I had this email address through the University of Maryland because I was working for the school system at the time, and they loaned us email accounts. And then I started, I would contribute stuff, and I became known as the town crier. Yeah, and so the TC Ikhide town crier is here. So I would say stuff, births, deaths, and so on and so forth. And then 1993 happened. When the democracy was truncated by Sani Abacha, and then there was a growing political movement within that space, and the intellectuals that were driving it at the time, I became close to them, and they would say, "Wow, all this writing that you're writing, maybe you should just join us and be our scribe." So I became a scribe to several political organizations, the Association of Nigerians Abroad, the Nigerian Freedom Foundation, and so on and so forth. And that was how it started. And then every now and then, if I got a lot of traffic with what I had written, I would recompose it into into an essay form. It was mostly creative non-fiction. I
Okay.
always had a hard trouble separating fact from fantasy from lies. So I would just put them all together, and I would send them to literary um, institutions like Guernica, Eclectica, and so on and so forth, and they would accept them.
Okay.
So it is not entirely true that not to you, but it's not entirely true that I'm not published. I'm published in several, several of them very competitive, and I began to uh, enjoy that attention I was getting from the literary community, and then I became part of the literary community. Then something happened to me, and as we over the years, I began to notice that books were becoming exceedingly expensive for young people, which really pained me because I was raised in books. I was raised by books, and my mother, who worked at home, could afford to give me money to go buy a magazine outside and come back. And she would get mad at me. If you don't behave yourself, I won't give you money to buy Sadness and Joy or Boom or any of those things. So that was how we were raised. And in fact, to show you the power of books, by the time I went to London for the first time, it was as if I had been there.
Yes, exactly. It's the same experience that I had also. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say, I know you, I've been there, Hyde Park, the idiot, the troublemaker on the idiot box, talking, I've been there, Buckingham Palace, and so on and so forth. So, in fact, I was to later reflect after visiting Italy that reading basically killed my love for travel because I had traveled to all of these places before.
Through the written word.
Huh?
I said through the written word you've
traveled.
traveled.
The written word, yes. So we were just in Italy, and I was like, "Well, it's Venice. We've been to Venice before. What's this?" So I began to see that as writers, we were in danger of being cut off from young readers, young African readers who were hiding behind expensive paywalls, these journals. We were writing books that were like $25 each, and so on and so forth. And people couldn't really afford them. On the other hand, these young folks were very, very voracious readers. But they were reading the wrong content, you see. They were on these gossip blogs and doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't be. And it occurred to me, you have a choice. You could either become a little bit wealthier by writing books, or you can just write for free and give back the way like Jabez, the Shoyinkas, the Wakpas gave to you, the Okaras, just give back. So I started writing content. I would just write for free. And people would always tell me, "You are wasting your time. Why don't you do this? Why don't you?" But I grew a huge following on Twitter. I have over 40,000 followers. On Facebook, I have like 30,000 followers, maxed out at 5,000 friends, and so on my blogs and all that. So I feel I started writing on social media as a calling. I thought it comes, of course, with its own responsibility. When people look to you, it's a certain type of power, and the challenge is not to abuse it. Yeah. So I started using social media as a medium, and also not just for me as an activist and as a literary enthusiast, but also professionally as someone who was with a school system for 31 years. I saw how books were becoming gentrified from the let me hold this book to put it on Kindle. I remember staying up at midnight for a Harry Potter book because my daughter would say, "It's out tonight. Go to Barnes and Noble or whatever." I don't know if you remember all that.
Isn't that so special? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and we would wait, and she would wake up, and that book better be waiting for her in bed. But now, by the time they got out of college, whatever it was, they had weaned themselves of physical books.
Yeah.
They are now, and so a lot of us bemoan the fact that our children are no longer reading books. I bemoan the fact that our children are reading too much of the wrong thing.
Yes, I agree.
So it's a leadership issue, and we have to, especially with, if America, you see what's happening in America today. A lot of it is as a direct result of people being uneducated, and I'm not just talking about classroom education. So if America can afford her nonsense, Africa cannot afford. Nigeria definitely cannot afford the situation we're in. I went home in 2023, and I'm telling you, just like in America, every home I went to, there was no book except the Bible.
Yeah, and also all these religious texts. And I'm so glad that, because I actually hadn't realized that we could trace your career as a town crier back to the 90s. And in those years, social media has come along and it's almost become like the global village town square. And for many Nigerians at home and abroad, they turn to social media for that, I want to say, unfiltered perspective on governance, culture, and daily life. Do you think, in speaking about the things that our children are reading, do you think that social media has created a more nuanced understanding of Nigeria, or has it reinforced certain stereotypes?
All of the above.
Okay.
Depending on which lane you are in. But I take the generous view that the real literature is on social media. You see, so if you just wake up one morning and you just spend all day all kinds of things come at you.
Yes.
In 3D. In 3D, it's a lot. The beauty of it is the reader does not realize that they are the writer. And the writer does not realize that they're a reader. It's just back and forth, the back and forth call response stuff.
Yeah.
And so true. I'm addicted to that, because if I really want to taste Nigeria, with all due respect, I no longer go to the books. I just go on social media. Now we no longer talk about books. We talk about personalities. You talk about people. Oh, let me go. I wonder what Ikhide is doing. Let me go see what that rascal is.
No, it's funny that you would say so, because I mean, one of the things I'm doing with the series is I'm talking to a lot of Nigerian writers who are writing from the diaspora. And the question I always ask is, how do you, retain that Nigerian flavor, even though you don't live in the country? And overwhelmingly, a lot of people say, I go on Twitter and I listen to what people are saying. I look at Facebook, and that's how I get my material, which is interesting. And one of the things I like about your social media posts is that you're very strategic about highlighting both the resilience and dysfunction of Nigerian society. How do you strike a balance between critique and celebration in your commentary?
Well, I am unabashedly a Nigeria fan. I came to this country when I was just 23. Everything about me, had been baked in me. The food, when I go home to Nigeria to visit today, the first thing I want to do is eat. It tastes different. The beer tastes different. Everything is different, and it's just part of me. And Nigeria is almost bipolar, the way Nigeria is.
Yeah, that's true.
Nigeria is in the US. Nigerians are highly respected, as hardworking, brilliant, enterprising people. But we are harder on ourselves and on our country than anybody else. And I put myself in that category. I walk into a room and I proudly say first, I'm a Nigerian, before I say I'm an American, because I get more of a positive response from the room. Sounds transactional, than if I simply say I'm just another American. Because the data is there about our accomplishments, about our reputation, and all that. A lot of times people talk about the scams and all that, but you say on balance, we are a very, very honest people. Sounds counterintuitive. It's just that and that's why when these kinds of things happen, we make a lot of noise about it. Oh my God, why did this person go and do that stuff? If all of our Nigerians were to leave America today, America would be in big trouble.
Oh wow, yeah, that's true.
So that's I really don't wake up and say, well, I'm going to say something nice about Nigeria today. I just go. I just go.
Yeah.
I find an angle in the morning, depending on my mood, and I go down that path. I have to say that, I am beginning to appreciate the fact that a lot of traditional Nigerian writers are no longer just hanging around social media looking for material. They are participating now. They are giving back. And I like to give myself some credit for shaming all of you guys into.
And we'll come to that. We'll come to that in a minute because I really want to engage with you on that level.
Yeah. So
but go ahead.
Yeah. So although I'm not very popular in the literary community, as I like to think that we've made a lot of progress in engaging as storytellers, and some of it is because I was a pain in the
yeah.
to folks.
Well, I'm not agreeing that you were a pain. You were brutally honest, and I think that honesty is something that we all need. One of the things that I mean, still staying on the topic of Nigeria before we shift gears, you highlighted the country is a country of extreme contrasts. Great wealth, deep poverty, brilliant minds, failed institutions. And it's such a paradox that often defies explanation. I think someone once popularly said that if you explain Nigeria to somebody and they understand it, you have not explained it well. And what do you think explains this paradox, in your opinion?
Nigeria, we are different people. So the colonialists came and they just put together all these disparate people in one space, different cultures, different attitudes, different aptitudes, and it was an extractive space for them. They came and they built really crude transportation systems to take cocoa from the west, groundnuts from the north, and so on and so forth. And then they built really crude systems. The Nigerian police force today is a very crude system. It's mostly brawn, very little brains, because it was used to capture people. It was used to capture the system. And when you look at the Nigerian police force today compared to 1960 or the 50s, when my father joined the police force, nothing has changed materially. You see, if you look at the public school systems, from Eba school, from kindergarten to university, nothing has changed materially since the sixth university was set up, the University of Benin that I attended. They were set up by the white man to quickly bring up horsepower to keep the place going for their own needs. We have been too lazy to change that. Now there are private institutions, and you could tell the difference in quality and standards between the private institutions and the public institutions. Because with the private institutions, there is an incentive for them to be a certain way. So there is a conversation where narrative comes head to head with the reality of our politics, which is how do we reorganize ourselves in order to make progress? And that's where we come in. We've not done a good job of holding ourselves accountable. We've not done a good job of saying, well, this is nice, but can we do things in a different way? And that's where I have been, hard on us as intellectuals, hard on us as writers and as professionals, saying, one of the unintended consequences of globalization is that thinkers, writers, professional folks like us can afford to take our families away from the scene of the crime. And while we stay there and pretend to be running the place, our children are abroad in America and in Europe. Our families are abroad in America and in Europe, living their best lives. But we still hold on to ancient systems that's been holding Nigeria back. And that's the kind of question I ask people. If you really believe in this university that you're vice chancellor of, why are your kids in in Maryland with my own kids. There is no answer for that. So yeah.
I think, and there's a phrase that I often associate with Nigerians, the Nigerian mentality. It's not something that you can easily describe. It's just something that you know. Do you think that Nigerian mentality plays a role in the outcomes of the country, in the way things are being done? I mean, you mentioned the vice chancellor. He or she probably sees nothing wrong with sending their children abroad while they're heading a university that probably does not have enough resources, and then they're not advocating enough for that university. I mean, just using that as an example, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone here.
Well, I try very hard to ask myself, are we addressing the symptoms of a deeper issue? We go beyond those symptoms and say, why are things the way they are? So we have had, if there is no accountability, if you know that we are human beings after all, and if you know that the chances of you being caught are very low, you are more likely to behave a certain way. If you know that your chances are very high that you will be caught, that defines your morality, you see. And so in the United States, I tell people the thing that saves America is the rules, the accountability systems, and so on and so forth. People know that if they are driving on the road and they run a stoplight, it is quite possible that there is some mechanism, or even a police officer that's right there waiting to pick you up, and the consequences are expensive. So
I hear you, and sorry to interrupt. I mean, listening to you speak, I'm reminded of something that I think it was Ganifa Emi that said that in a lawless country, it is illegal to be law-abiding.
Yes. And that is where we are now in Nigeria. I have relatives who most of my relatives who, as far as I know, have spent their lives being law-abiding. They are miserable because they have nothing to show for that other than, nothing. But on the other hand,
say they have nothing. I mean, they probably have a clean conscience, a clear conscience.
Now who clean conscience help?
Pa, you've come again. Now who conscience help? Okay, I hear you.
Then I have young relatives, young talks who say, I have watched my uncle, Ikhide. I have watched my other uncle. I have watched and look at where they are. Even the best of them, I don't want to be like them. So I'm just going to do what I need to do. And they have built generational wealth from just being bad. You understand? And now we all go to them for money. We no longer ask. Where did you get that $10 million from? No. We say, well, when are you going to send me my alert?
I wonder though, I mean, you touch on a good point there, because if you could change one thing about the way Nigerians engage with their country, and I say this coming from a place where both Nigerians at home and in the diaspora, we're rather cynical about the country's future. And I don't want to go into the rabbit hole of, saying, is the skepticism justified? I mean, everyone has their own personal experience, which is valid. But if you could change the way we engage with our country, whether in terms of the way criticism, optimism, or even activism, what would it be?
Well, again, I don't, if you've spent 60 years of your life in a space so full of promise and everything, and you wake up and you say, well, I'm 60, there's no going back, this is what I am. It's more than cynicism. You are really, this is the reality of your life.
Yeah, that's true.
It is the reality of, there is nothing to be cynical about. You are just telling it. If you can no longer buy eggs that you used to buy as a little boy, and as an adult with several children, it hurts. So, again, it comes to the use of language to free or to enslave. So gaslighting is a real issue in Nigeria these days. Somebody says, "Well, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten for 3 days." Somebody says, "Ah, you are too cynical." No, they are hungry. They haven't had much to eat. I know relatives who I used to go to who were really well-to-do middle class, in the 70s and early 80s before I left the country, who would just give me money, who would give me things, who would pay for my education, who would, whatever I needed. They today, in the winter of their lives, if you don't send them, say, 20,000 naira, 10,000 naira, they can't, nothing, they have nothing to show for it. So it is every man, every woman for him or herself in Nigeria right now. So it's not it's very, very difficult for me to blame someone who is skeptical about the way things are in that country. Would I like a more positive narrative? Absolutely. Life is short. As far as I know, we only have one lifetime to live. Why so much suffering? Why so much suffering? Uh, we have Nigeria should not be a poor country. Nigeria should not be a poor country. So since independence, we have basically been, drawing down the money, looting it with little or no consequences. So I see people come from that country and they settle down here to go to school. My little niece, 11 years old when she came to this country, she's 18 now. The brilliance in her, she went to a one of those unity schools. The critical thinking skills, a lot of the stuff that was forged out of suffering as a child, she would tell me how they treated her in the boarding school, how poorly she was treated, and she was telling her cousins how poorly she was treated at this unity school, and they were
in Nigeria.
Yeah, in Nigeria, they were laughing because they thought it was funny, but they did not detect the terror in her eye, in her voice as she was talking about, the predatory behavior of, and it affected her in a certain perversely positive way. She's very charming. She can walk her way around misbehaving adults, and she's very smart academically. I said, because she knows how to deflect. But that's not how a child should be raised. The first time she went to her middle school here, right, when I went to enroll her in the middle school, the principal of the school had a welcoming party for her. They hugged her. She did not understand why a principal would hug her. She says,
yeah.
So those are the kinds of, it's a very, very complex, and it didn't start yesterday, by the way. I went to boarding school. I will tell you that I should have a T-shirt that says I survived Catholic boarding school.
No, but it's true because I didn't go to boarding school, but I went to a school that had both, but my parents chose to make me a day student. And when I think back on it, I'm actually writing about a boarding school right now. I think back on it and I realized that some of the things that were being done, they were like glorified prison camps.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate because a lot of people, do you want to say they didn't know better? I mean, how would we question the way they acted? I mean,
they came, okay, if you take Catholic boarding school, the Irish came with their Victorian anxieties. They came with their hot temper. They came with all kinds of things. They also came with some good things like books, libraries, and all that. And they set up a system. The fathers set up a system. You had the fathers, the nuns, then you had the prefects, upper class men and women who lorded it over the rest of the world. So there are things that happen to us in boarding school that, because we are Africans, so to speak, we don't want to talk about it. But I tell people that if young boys like me were to sue the Catholic Church for the sexual, physical, and other abuses that happen to us under their watch, the Catholic Church would be bankrupt.
Wow.
But we don't talk about those things. Going to 5 years of boarding school for me was terrifying. Yeah, I had not turned 11 when I started Form 1. You think of your child, a 10-year-old boy, in such a situation, fighting off predators, rapists, people physically abusing you, not knowing, it's just the waiting, not knowing when they will come at you was the most terrifying thing. When it came, there was relief. Well, I'm being beaten up. So, so that was how we lived for 5 years.
And because our parents place so much value on education,
yes.
If you were to tell the adult responsible for in your life that I'm going through this,
yeah.
I mean, it would be, what would the consequences be? You're there to get an education, do whatever you have to do, and be good.
And that's it. That's the beautiful summary of Chukwuemeka Ike's The Potter's Wheel. So the protagonist, the little boy, was just a spoiled little kid, pampered, loved by the mother, the father. He was also brilliant. That was his crime. They sent him away to this teacher who had the wife from hell, and he endured unspeakable abuse. Well, if you ever find that book, try to find it.
We're going to talk about this because some of those books, those are classics. That when you find them anywhere in the diaspora, meanwhile, if you go to Lagos or somewhere, you will probably see somebody selling it for. But in the diaspora, there are people probably selling those books for hundreds of dollars.
Oh yeah, very expensive.
And that's a problem. That's a problem. I wanted to just also keep on in terms of, because I don't want it to be all gloom and doom when we're talking about Nigeria, because we do have creative brilliance, literature, music, art. In spite of the infrastructure and political failures that the country has, do you believe that Nigerian excellence thrives despite or because of the country's challenges?
I think in terms of the space that we're in, the literary world, I think that it thrives because there's a story that has a market.
There's a story that has
a market. And so I think that if we didn't have that story, we are not naturally very competitive. We would still find a way of excelling. I remember 1986 when Professor Wole Soyinka won the Nobel Prize. I was in Morristown, Tennessee, and it was as if my father or my uncle or somebody or my older brother had won the Nobel Prize. I was just walking around grinning. In those days, of course, there was no internet, nothing. There was his picture with this hair. And I went to this African American and I said, "Oh, look, we won the Nobel Prize." I said, "Who we?" I said, and he looked at the picture. He says, "That's a lot of hair." That's all she could get. I was like,
"Oh my goodness!
You don't understand. This is the Nobel Prize. The
highest prize in literature, and the Nigerian won it."
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so that showed you how excited I was. I remember, I think it was 1994 or thereabouts, when the Nigerian Green Eagles came for the World Cup or something, and I was watching them on television, and they were winning these games, and I would look forward to watching them. And my boss then would let me turn on the TV at work and watch them. When they lost and they had to go back home, I was upset. It was like my brothers were going back home.
Oh.
So it's just there is just something about Nigeria that's with you. But, I just sometimes when I'm down, I go to the markets. I go to the Nigerian markets, and I all those things that are not fresh anymore. I'm buying stuff, trying to remember, the bread of my childhood, trying to recapture, because it was a country that gave me so much. It's that gave us so much, and a lot of the dysfunctions, again, like I said, that we talk about, came from the colonial masters, came from the churches. During the war, so I grew up in the barracks. My father was part of the first set of mobile police. He started in Lagos, then he started the mobile police force unit in Ibadan, where I started primary school. During the war, we had to go home to the village to basically hide until the war was over. And I discovered a place that was separate from the culture that I lived in the barracks. In the barracks, we lived in cramped quarters, a room and a parlor. And the men would go out, go fighting, get drunk, come back, and sometimes we were just the punching bags of the men, of women and children. So you could hear people, upset every now and then. But I went to the village and I found a different, wide open spaces, farmland, women Nigeria is a huge, huge space.
Yes, it is.
But so you can't just generalize about. But I found partnerships between men and women. I found uncles and aunts who didn't hit us. And I saw, the men and women were hunters and gatherers. They would go out and come back with their produce, the game, whatever they caught, and everything will be handed over to the women for safekeeping. So the women basically managed the joint account, if you will. But in the city, my mother, who ended up raising 10 of us literally every day, was considered somebody who didn't work, right? Didn't work, and she got chop money from a man who went out and so those were things that came with the colonial masters. The notion of treating your wife as as second hand, or treating your children as whatever they shouldn't be. Those were things that came with from an alien culture. I tell somebody, I said, "Do you know how boys quarters came?" They said, "Well, the white man did not want your parents to be in the main quarters with you, so they built the boys' quarters in the back for them." She says, "Really?" I say, "Yeah." But now what have we done? We have imbibed that culture with pride.
Yes, with pride, and we're putting because if you have people who are working for you, like you have a driver, or how many families allow those people who are human beings like you to sit on a dining table?
They're not allowed to. They're not allowed.
Very rarely would you see. There are people who do, but very rarely would you see that happen. And I want to thank you for painting that picture that you painted, because it's such a sharp contrast between urban life in Nigeria and the rural life, and that's where the whole mentality thing comes in. I think if you were to talk to somebody who migrated from the village or from the rural area and went to live in the urban area, they would probably adopt that mentality and forget, because it's almost like a survivalist mentality. So I had said that we were going to shift gears and talk about Nigerian literature and dig deeper, because we have been talking about it. I remember when I published my book of short stories, and you were so kind to receive a copy and write a review. And one of the criticisms that you had, which was also a very strong learning point for me, and I wanted to make sure that I said this to you in public, was that you said that in the dialogue, I had translated the pidgin English into regular English. I don't know if you remember that. And it was a point that I received with such clarity, because I knew I had done it because I wanted, the story to be a lot more accessible to a wider audience. And it was something I had probably done unconsciously, but immediately I pointed that out. I knew that wasn't something I was supposed to do. You have been very vocal in your strong opinions about the Nigerian literary community, particularly Nigerian writers in the diaspora. Do you think we Nigerian writers in the diaspora often prioritize, what would I call it, Western validation over local readership? And if you agree, what would you say the consequences of that have become?
You're asking me that question. That's obvious. I think, and I don't say that to be as a form of criticism.
No.
What obtains in the literary world obtains in the professional world. Doctors are fleeing Nigeria in the droves. Nurses are fleeing. All of us, we're doing what we have to do, I guess, to survive. The only my frustration, of course, and this is just perhaps inappropriate idealism on my part, is that I always thought narrative was sacrosanct. All of that stuff, but there had to be purity in the narrative. So the good news was that a lot of African writers found favor, so to speak, in the West. Found this niche, not only in publishing, but in generous grants and all sorts of things. And so, as this was happening, they were becoming used to it. There is no. I tell folks, it didn't start yesterday. If you go from the 50s down, African literature has been held harmless by Western largesse. There is no. In 1962, the first literary conference that was held at Makerere University was funded by the CIA. See, and I tell people, without the West, Soyinka would be dead today. He's in his 90s. Without the West, Achebe would have been dead much earlier. When he got that accident and he became paralyzed, over here, and they so prioritized his well-being and the fact that he's he's a living library. They made sure that they had a house that was ADA compliant for him. That would not have happened in Nigeria, trust me. And so, Biavanga Wainana relied on grants. So it's even Dambutso Marichera, before he was kicked out of Oxford and all of that, when he started getting really intense, some would say sick. But all of our writers, when you think about it, have lived in them. But it has come at a huge cost, I think. If people are just saying, well, I'm just going to live in Nigeria, observe what all the horrible things that are happening, I will write it down and send it to Random House. Screw Nigeria. Well, but what does it do to the message? What does it do to the quality of and I would say, why are you doing a footnote on Egusi? If they really are interested in you, they will Google it.
Yes.
And they will come up.
That's true.
So I will tell you, the good news is, thanks to my advocacy and agitation, Nigerian writing, has gotten to that point where people are writing with more self-confidence. You understand? They are saying, I'm just going to, Ikhide is right. I'm just going to write, and we'll find creative ways of drawing the Western reader in. And they've been successful in some of it. I said to folks, if you keep explaining it, you're not making them curious enough.
Yeah.
About you, about where you came from. But still, writing for the West, even with all of that creativity, is not the same as reading raw, unfiltered stuff on social media.
No, I agree. And I just wanted to also because one of the things that you had said during our conversation was the fact that the first time you went to London, you had already read about it, about it in the books. The first, and I had that experience as well. I remember the first set of books where I learned to read was these books that they call the Janet and John books. And in the books, Janet and John were doing things that were not exactly culturally relevant to me, wearing mittens, putting on their gloves. They were playing in the snow. But by the time I saw snow when I moved overseas, it wasn't foreign to me. But at no point in any of the literature that I read that featured snow did they start over-describing or over-explaining what it was. And I think we need to also reciprocate that in our literature and in the way we write. So that was a lesson learned for me when I was a baby writer. Now I understand how, even when it comes to this, over-explaining, over-describing. And do you think that Nigerian writers, you've talked about how, the West definitely has contributed to the livelihoods, the way many of us float our work and things like that. Do you think that there's a gap between the way the writers in the diaspora explore the themes that they explore when they're writing? And is there a disconnect between that and the lived realities of Nigerians at home? Are they writing what the local people want to read?
That's a brilliant question. So I'm going to answer it this way. It's a brilliant question in the sense that the writer is mostly often an alien looking in from the outside. Mostly middle-class type folks going, oh, look, I saw somebody selling bananas on the tray up, the go slow. That should be interesting. Let me write about it. The person that is selling the banana on her head is not going to write the book. Right? So it is us. And it's not just in the writing. Fela was middle class, upper middle class, right? Fela Anikulapo Kuti went to the UK, studied whatever he studied, came back, and he was playing music that was not connected to. They called him his outfit Pula Lobitos. Then he connected one day and said, "Well, I'm just going to do stuff about about the vulnerable in the gritty streets," and he did that, and he was highly successful. Burna Boy, same thing. So now social media though, somebody could be selling bananas and just say, "Well, I'm on my 5-minute break." And start writing. Oh my God! Look at what happened to me today.
And we've seen that.
So, and that's just, and they're writing. They're just typing on their Nokia phone. And so it is a phenomenon unlike you've ever. And before you know, the person is now a content creator.
Yes, and the videos. I saw a TikTok the other day of this girl whose mom sells akara on the side of the road, and she was like, "We're in the junction of this place and that place. Come and patronize us." And then she now did another video where she was like, "Thank you for watching my video where our sales have increased." And so, I like the way you mentioned the banana seller, because now it means that the power has shifted. The banana seller now has the medium to tell their own stories, because whatever story the person in the air-conditioned car is driving past seeing the banana seller, there isn't that level of authenticity. It's always going to be something. I imagine that they're suffering. Maybe they're enjoying selling bananas on the road and they have a beautiful life and a supportive family. And it's up to that banana seller to tell that story in a way that represents them accurately.
I call it the democratization of narrative.
Yes.
The ability to tell your own story. And so a lot of people, if you put Adiche on the streets of Ewu today, nobody knows who she is. Nobody cares. But if you put, say, name any of these content folks, I'm reluctant to put a name down there. They are more likely to know them.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so that is the world we now live in. So when somebody, the second African that won the Nobel Prize the other day, about 2 years back, Ghana, I said, who is he? What has he written?
No, and it's a valid question, because
and he's written very good, lots of books.
Yeah.
But nobody, even in his village in Tanzania, if he goes to Tanzania, he hasn't been to Tanzania since he left. He's been there a couple of times, I guess. If he goes to Tanzania, nobody knows him. Nobody cares. but they know their content, folks. You know, they know their content.
And going back to the publishing world, do you think the demand for Nigerian/African literature in the West is shaping what gets written and published? And I know that that's a very loaded question, but I'm looking back at what you said about the banana seller. Do you think that because they know that, they want to hear the story of a traumatic experience that led to this girl selling bananas on the road is why, certain stories are told a certain way? I think about some of the feedback that I've received on my writing when it gets rejected, and it's like, more people should be suffering in this story. And there's that demand for the trauma narrative, almost as if we as Africans, we hold the copyright on bad things happening to us, and we can't be joyful or creative or innovative. And there's a power dynamic at play here, because I always tell people that if only everything I could pay for everything with air, I would do nothing but write. But the reality is, I live in a world where there are demands that be made, and those demands require financial, and so, how does that whole capitalism/globalization play a role in the sorts of stories that are coming out of the diaspora, and that they're supposed to be authentic Nigerian stories?
I popularized the term poverty prone many years ago. Right after Biavanga Wainana wrote how to write about Africa, right? But it was really he was aiming at white writers, at white journalists who liked the power, I guess, of the single story to sell their stuff. But I was writing at the time. I was a columnist with Next. I don't know if you remember. And this one day I got really angry, and I said, "How not to write?" I wrote a couple of pieces, "How not to write about Africa," and I just aimed my guns at my fellow writers. And I really talked about this whole. I was going after all of them after reading the Kane Prize submissions. I think it was like 2011. I don't know, late 2011 or even earlier than that. I was going after the Kane Prize submissions because, with no exception, they all were about poverty. And I think that year, the person that won it, I predicted that they would win because they were a better writer, but it was still all poverty prone, and I'm very unhappy about it. I think that you're right. That if people say, "Write me a story about suffering," so I will proceed. If there's a market for it, I will proceed to produce that market. And as we know, Africa is not all about suffering. There are beautiful stories, there are beautiful songs, beautiful dances, and many people have achieved. And so that is why, again, it keeps coming back to why people prefer the raw, unfiltered narrative that they see online, because they know that it is not, the people are not selling it. Maybe one of these days, people will start selling it, and then it will change how it is packaged. But a lot of people, I tell folks, there are many writers or many readers on social media that I will pay if they had a subscription, then I would pay, and they would make a lot more money than if they were waiting to publish a book.
And it's interesting because anytime, and I'm not going to mention any names because that's not the purpose of this conversation. We're not trying to demonize anyone, but I always think about the Nigerians that I see in positions of power, positions of prominence, and the way, and not all of them, but the way many of them always, promote that suffering mentality. And I'm like, the same country that you lived in, yes, NEPA took light. Yes, maybe you turned on the tap and the water didn't come out. Yes, all that happened. But then there was also I remember there was a hill because we lived in one neighborhood at one point, and all of the children from that neighborhood would gather around that hill, and and it didn't matter who you were, where you came from, and we would just have like such a blast. And I mean, just having that childhood experience, that memory is forever seared in me, where we didn't have any stress, we didn't have, and the only way we knew that we needed to go home was when the sun was coming down. And so I wonder how we don't have people telling stories like that, because again, we look at the poverty that we're looking at is through the definition of the Western lens,
Yes.
because poverty does not equal unhappiness. There's some
Yeah.
people who have hardly anything, but they're extremely happy.
Exactly.
And why are those stories being told?
In fact, I told you, if you remember, I said during the war, when I went home,
Mm-hmm.
I found people who were literally spiritually and materially wealthier than us.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting was they thought we were the wealthy ones. We were coming from the city, you see. So they go, "Oh, when did you come? You live in this is my," and they was proudly introduced us. This is my nephew. He lives in the city. This is my niece. She lives in Lagos. And then you go to Lagos and you find these people living literally. There is a gutter right through their living room.
Yeah.
The first time I saw Ajegule, my jaw just dropped. I said, "Oh, what is this?" So this is and again, it is part of the colonial mentality. The white man has their symptoms. Everything everything that is white is right. And so we have to sort of get out of that mentality. In fact, it informs my attitude a lot when I talk about Ewu.
Yeah.
With some people, I make fun of. I'm mocking people when I talk about.
Well, that's true. There's we can see the hint of sarcasm there.
Yes,
And I
exactly.
wonder, I mean, do you believe that Nigerians in the diaspora have a moral or cultural duty to contribute to showcasing the way the country is highlighted, reflected, or should they just focus on that? I mean, what duty do we have, especially those of us who don't have that huge platform? But I mean, the voice that we have is the voice. It's the voice of reason. How do we showcase our country without, looking at it through, refracting it through the Western lens, where it still has to be a certain way in order for it to be palatable?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, my priority basically is trying to get all of us to hold the government of the day accountable. So I am not really interested in making Nigeria look good when I know that people are just looting the place. When I know that, look, things are bad. I retired from the school system after 31 years, and when I left, the cost per pupil, that is what it costs to educate a regular child in that school system today, is a little over $20,000 a year.
Okay.
Cost per pupil. It's a local government, and by law, literally, the budget of the school system is half the budget of the local government. So
the entire county. Okay, got it.
yeah,
Okay.
so the county's operating budget is $7 billion. The school system's budget is $3.5 billion. $3.5 billion. My wife's niece was doing research, comparable research on cost per people in Black African countries. And the highest he found was in Sierra Leone, $100 per person. You will never close the achievement gap. You will never close the equity gap with that. All of the rulers and the thinkers and the professionals that are doing this to poor children have all of their children with us. And so I believe the best way to be positive about Nigeria is to say, we are not there, so we can afford to hold these folks accountable and hold them accountable. I think that it is quite. I think it is quite possible to highlight positive things that folks are doing, but it's very difficult to find positive things that are institutionalized, that institutions are doing. It's a problem. So that needs to, we need to have that conversation. And a lot of times, a lot of people who are saying, try to be positive now, they are enjoying from the system.
Yes,
so
they're enjoying from the
they're gaslighting you so that you don't.
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. Yeah, we're coming close to the end of this really great conversation, and I wanted to squeeze two more questions in.
Sure.
The first one was, what I'm asking everyone this that I'm talking to, all of my guests, what do you miss most about living in Nigeria?
Well, so I have written several essays about Nigeria. It's almost like an obsession, you see. Well, I in 1982, my friend left for Oxford, Mississippi in January. I missed him so much. I joined him. I joined him in July, August of 1982, and he would send me all these pictures of himself with snow on the winter jacket. He would be posing by cars, and he would talk about meeting beautiful women like you, and they were all over the place. All you want, any woman you want. I say, me, hey, come back and enjoy women in America. I come to this country, it is nothing like that. It's a different ball game. The money wasn't on the floor. He didn't tell me that part. There was not the food tasted different. The food to this day I still miss the food more than anything else. I don't know what it is about the food. No matter how you spice it, it doesn't taste like back. The stew in Nigeria is not the same stew.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because all they do is put salt and pepper and maybe one cube of Maggi, and I could eat that thing forever. When I go to an Amala joint, there's one called the University of Amala. The proprietor knows me. I would just sit there and I would binge, just keep eating. I miss it. Nigeria is the only place where I drink their beer. If the beer here, I don't know what it is about it. It doesn't taste. So there is the spirituality also. You come out of the plane, it's like your spirit is at home. There are different anxieties, but the anxieties are not the same as the anxieties that are here. That whole notion of your blackness here is different from the notion of your being over there. So I would say food. I miss the food. When I came in 82, I almost went crazy. Mental health became an issue because I missed everything. Just missed everything about that country. And when I went back 5 years later, it was like binging and everything.
I know.
The friendships, the food,
the community. It's funny because you're in good company because nearly everyone that I have talked to, food is on top of their list. It's the first thing on my list as well. You talked about your essays.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever write a book, publish a
book? No, it is my great
chronicling what your eye has seen on these social media streets.
It is my great desire to die without having written a book.
Really?
Yes, it is my great desire to die without having written a book. I have contributed a chapter or two to books. I don't know if you know that. Professor Falola's book. Professor Falola.
Professor Tony Falola, yeah.
Yeah, there was a book about him. I contributed a chapter, and somebody will say, let's do something. I said, sure, I will humor them. I have been very lucky that there is no incentive for me to write a book. I don't need the money because I travel light. I don't, if I eat too much, I get sick. If I drink too much, I get sick. So my kids are all grown out of the house on their own. So there is no incentive for me to do. And I feel like I was built in the oral tradition of my ancestors. I'm an oral storyteller, and social media offered me the chance to be an oral storyteller. I don't have to write. if I wrote a book, the title would be "This is not a book."
I like that. I like that.
But I don't see myself. I think that when I join my ancestors, there will be people who will just cobble together all of my crazy rants, as much of them as they can, and then put them. Somebody was a few years ago. Somebody was showing me this university lecturer who coupled my Facebook posts and clip them together and offer them as assigned text.
Where was this happening?
This was in a university in Nigeria somewhere.
I
thought that was funny.
It is. Oh my goodness.
It was so cute, how much they revered my rant.
Oh, honestly, impressive. And on that note, Ikhide, we're gonna end the conversation. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for making the time, because I know that there's so many other things you could have been doing with your retirement life than talking to Jola Naibi on this.
I've enjoyed this. Now I will have to go back and finish the errands my wife asked me to.
It's always a pleasure. Keep on keeping on, and thank you so much for the wisdom, the wit that you bring to your social media posts. We look forward to reading more from you.
And stay in touch and send me the link for this thing so I can.
Yes, so that all your people can hear you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
What an engaging conversation. You will notice that we went in so many different tributaries during our time together. I really hope you enjoyed listening to that. Thank you for your time. And on the next episode of Tokumbo,
that we belong to a tradition of storytelling that began before there were books.